Imagine a fog-shrouded dawn in Newport's Gilded Heart, where silk curtains whisper secrets to the wind. A woman's perfume lingers like a ghost in an empty room, champagne glasses frozen in time, a letter unfinished, bearing words of forbidden love. But Isabella Fairmont, society's radiant idol, has vanished into the mist, her disappearance a divine reckoning for sins hidden in marble halls. What unholy pact drew her into the abyss? Stay with me. The truth will chill your soul. In the dim light of a March morning in 1889, the Belmont Hotel's corridors echoed with the muffled footsteps of servants, their polished shoes sinking into plush Persian carpets that muffled secrets as effectively as they absorbed sound. The air hung heavy with the scent of polished mahogany and fresh-cut lilies, arranged in crystal vases that caught the weak sunlight filtering through leaded glass windows. Room 237, a sanctuary of opulence reserved for the elite, stood silent, too silent. The door creaked open under the hesitant hand of a chambermaid, her apron starched white against the gloom. Inside, the scene unfolded like a painting frozen in tragedy. Velvet drapes half drawn against the foggy harbor view, casting long shadows across the room. Twin champagne flutes on a marble side table, their contents evaporated to mere stains, bubbles long since burst. And on the ebony writing desk, a sheet of fine vellum paper, ink still glistening on half-formed words. My dearest, the weight of this deception, trailing off into nothingness, the quill abandoned beside it like a fallen sword. No sign of struggle, no overturned chair or shattered vase. Just absence. Pure, aunting absence. Isabella Fairmont, the woman whose name evoked envy and awe in equal measure among America's aristocracy, had dissolved into the ether, leaving behind a void that pulsed with unspoken sins. The staff whispered prayers under their breath, crossing themselves against the chill that wasn't from the drafty windows. For in that empty room, it felt as if divine eyes had witnessed and judged. The disappearance sent ripples through Newport's high society like a stone cast into still waters. But these were no ordinary ripples. They were waves that threatened to drown reputations built on fragile illusions of virtue. Authorities arrived by noon, their boots tracking mud onto the hotel's pristine floors, notebooks in hand, faces stern under bowler hats. They sealed the room, questioned the staff with clipped efficiency, but found no clues beyond the ordinary luxuries of a life lived in excess. Yet, as days turned to weeks, their investigation unearthed threads of a tapestry woven with deceit, passion, and something darker, perhaps the hand of Providence itself, meting out justice for transgressions against the sacred bonds of marriage and morality. 3 influential families, their names synonymous with railroads and steel, quietly funneled fortunes to seal the police records, burying evidence that could topple empires. But secrets, like buried sins, have a way of rising, don't they? They fester in the soul, demanding confession, echoing the biblical warning. For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light. To grasp the magnitude of Isabella's vanishing, we must rewind the clock to the sun-drenched summers of Newport in the early 1880s, where the Gilded Age bloomed in all its extravagant, soul-testing glory. Picture Bellevue Avenue at dusk. Horse-drawn carriages clattering over cobblestones, their wheels kicking up dust that shimmered golden in the fading light. Massive mansions rising like marble fortresses, their facades adorned with Corinthian columns and intricate ironwork forged in distant foundries. Gardens exploding with imported roses, their petals unfurling in hues of crimson and ivory, releasing fragrances that masked the underlying rot of unchecked ambition. This was the playground of the nouveau riche. Railroad barons with calloused hands hidden under kid gloves, steel magnates whose fortunes were forged in fire and blood, shipping tycoons who commanded fleets larger than some navies. Wealth here wasn't just currency. It was a weapon, a shield, a temptation that lured souls toward the precipice of damnation. At the center of this glittering vortex stood Isabella Fairmont, née Aldridge, a figure so luminous she seemed ordained by some higher power to rule, or perhaps to fall as a cautionary tale. Born in 1859 under the stern Puritan skies of Boston, Isabella carried the weight of legacy in her veins. Her father, Cornelius Aldridge, a shipping magnate whose vessels plied the Atlantic like predatory sharks, amassing riches that rivaled ancient kings. Her mother, descended from the Massachusetts Bay Colony's founders, instilling in her a rigid code of propriety that clashed with the era's hedonistic undercurrents. Isabella's beauty was legendary. Raven hair, cascading like midnight silk, eyes of piercing sapphire that could disarm with a glance, a form sculpted as if by Michelangelo himself, draped in gowns from Paris that whispered against her skin like forbidden promises. But it was her spirit that truly captivated, vivacious, intelligent, with a laugh that echoed like crystal chimes, drawing admirers like moths to a flame. In the biblical sense, she embodied Eve's curiosity, Sarah's grace, yet harbored the potential for Delilah's betrayal. Her union with Theodore Fairmont in 1878 was no mere marriage. It was a coronation. Theodore, heir to a Pennsylvania steel dynasty, exuded the solidity of his trade. Broad-shouldered, with a jaw set like forged iron, his demeanor a bastion of reliability amid the social whirl. Their wedding unfolded in Boston's grandest cathedral, candles flickering like watchful eyes, vows exchanged under stained-glass depictions of saints who seemed to frown in foreshadowing. The couple's Newport estate, Rosecliff Manor, was a monument to their ascendancy. 70 rooms of echoing grandeur, walls lined with Italian marble veined like the arteries of empire, chandeliers dripping crystal tears that refracted light into rainbows of illusion. The gardens stretched endlessly, manicured hedges forming labyrinths where secrets could hide, fountains murmuring like confessional whispers, peacocks strutting with iridescent plumes that symbolized pride's inevitable fall. Isabella's soirees were the stuff of legend, events where the air thickened with cigar smoke and perfume, laughter rising in crescendos over the clink of silver on porcelain. Senators in tailcoats bent ears to her wisdom. European dukes vied for dances under gaslit ballrooms. Business titans sealed pacts over aged brandy that burned like the fires of ambition. One invitation could elevate a family from obscurity to prominence, or condemn them to exile with its absence. The Newport Daily News chronicled her every move in Mrs. Fairmont's Chronicle, a column that dissected her charitable galas, funding orphanages with a flourish that masked her own inner voids, her sartorial choices that set trends across continents, her guest list that read like a roster of the mighty. She championed the arts with fervent passion, erecting Newport's inaugural theater. It staged a pulpit for European virtuosos whose melodies evoked heavenly choruses or infernal temptations. Her influence rippled outward. Railroad moguls sought her counsel on ventures that spanned nations. Politicians curried favor with gifts of rare jewels. Even President Arthur graced her table in 1883, his laughter booming amid discussions that blurred lines between power and providence. Yet, beneath this veneer of perfection, shadows gathered like storm clouds over the Atlantic. Newport society was a gilded cage, its bars forged from gossip and judgment, where reputations hung by threads as fragile as spider silk. The Bible speaks of the wages of sin being death, but in this world, sin's first toll was social death. Whispers that spread like plague, eroding foundations until collapse was inevitable. For Isabella, the descent began in the sultry summer of 1884, a season the press dubbed the Veil of Shadows, when the air hummed with cicadas and unspoken desires. It started subtly, a chance encounter that ignited like dry tinder under a spark. Enter Jonathan Pembroke, the architect whose arrival disrupted the careful equilibrium of Newport's elite. Tall and lean, with hair as dark as a raven's wing perpetually tousled by sea breezes, eyes of emerald that pierced like divine scrutiny, Pembroke carried an aura of enigma. His credentials were impeccable. A Gothic revival masterpiece for a Pittsburgh industrialist, it spires reaching heavenward in architectural prayer, a Virginia estate restoration that breathed life into colonial ghosts. But it was his personal allure that set hearts aflame, a romantic intensity that evoked Byron's heroes, a hint of danger that whispered of forbidden fruits in Eden's garden. Society matrons flushed at his approach, fanning themselves against the heat of unspoken fantasies. Their paths crossed at a committee for Trinity Church's expansion, the room heavy with the scent of aged wood and incense. Isabella, poring over blueprints under the glow of oil lamps, looked up as Pembroke entered, his boots echoing like fate's footsteps. Witnesses recalled the spark, a moment when eyes locked, souls recognizing kindred flames across the polished table. What began as professional discourse blossomed into peril. Consultations at Rosecliff Manor, where they'd wander gardens under blooming arbors, petals falling like confetti of doom. Hours in her private study, doors closed against prying eyes, voices murmuring secrets that echoed psalms of longing. The staff noticed first the subtle shifts. Isabella's laughter brighter, more melodic in his presence. Letters arriving in his bold script, sealed with wax that bore his crest. Extended absences where time slipped away like sand through fingers. Theodore ensnared in his steel empire's demands. Mills roaring with infernal heat. Workers toiling like souls in purgatory. Remained blind, praising Pembroke's designs as extensions of his wife's impeccable taste. Trust, that fragile vessel, cracked unnoticed. But Newport's vigilance rivaled heavenly watchfulness. By midsummer, whispers evolved into murmurs, sightings of intimate dinners, heads close under candlelight, walks along cliffs where waves crashed like judgments below. The damning blow, a maid's testimony of a stolen embrace in a conservatory, glass walls steaming with passion amid exotic ferns. Society's machinery, once her ally, pivoted with ruthless efficiency. Invitations dwindled, conversations cooled like autumn winds, social orbits realigned to eclipse her star. Isabella, ensnared in passion's web, seemed impervious, her demeanor radiant as if drunk on elixir of the heart. She met Pembroke with escalating audacity, defying norms like a modern Jezebel, challenging the gods of propriety. This hubris accelerated her ruin, for pride goeth before destruction, as the scriptures warn. The scandal erupted on October 12, 1884, via the New York Herald's venomous ink. Newport's fallen seraph screamed the headline. The column, penned by the shadowy Observer, dissecting the affair with scalpel precision. Clandestine meetings, financial entanglements, Pembroke's shadowed past. Revelations poured forth. Gambling debts that devoured fortunes, prior liaisons with affluent women, widows and wives ensnared in his charm, left destitute in his wake. Isabella, it alleged, had funneled funds from her coffers, sold heirlooms to feed his vices, her love a blindfold against deceit. Theodore's world shattered like fragile crystal. Confrontation in Rosecliff's library, flames crackling in the hearth, shadows dancing like accusing spirits. Isabella's denials crumbled under bank ledger's weight, tears streaming as she confessed love's tyranny. Theodore demanded severance, exile to Boston for redemption's path, a social penance to mend their fractured facade. Her refusal thundered, declarations of true affection, marriage's chains intolerable, divorce's scandal her chosen cross. Voices rose through the night, doors slamming like thunderclaps of wrath. Morning found Theodore hollow-eyed, soul aged by betrayal's forge. Financial probes revealed the depth. $50,000 vanished, a king's ransom in today's terms. Artworks pawned below value, including his mother's diamond necklace, a relic of familial piety sold for sin's sake. Investigators unearthed Pembroke's trail, Pittsburgh's scorned wife, Richmond's plundered widow, patterns of predation, a serpent in architect's guise. Presented to Isabella, evidence met not horror, but defense. Her love genuine, past's irrelevant. Theodore saw manipulation's mastery, her will bent like clay under potter's hand. By November, isolation engulfed her. The herald's tale spread nationwide, a feast for the masses. Wealth's hubris, beauty's fall, betrayal's sting, elements that fed public schadenfreude, reminding all of mortality's leveler. Isabella, once exalted, now pariah, her story a parable of temptation's cost, echoing Eden's loss. Yet in her eyes burned defiance, a spark of redemption's possibility or deeper damnation. As winter's chill descended, Newport's mansions shuddered like tombs, but Isabella's spirit simmered. Whispers of divine retribution circulated. Was her affair a test from above, her blindness a judgment on pride? The Bible's tales of fallen kings and wayward queens loomed large, suggesting her path led not to earthly exile, but spiritual reckoning. Little did society know, this was but the prelude to her 1889 vanishing, a disappearance that would expose veins of guilt running deeper than gold in the earth's crust. Theodore, grappling with forgiveness's thorn, hired more sleuths, their reports painting Isabella as victim and villain entwined. She withdrew to private chambers, mirrors reflecting a face etched with regret's lines, prayers perhaps whispered for absolution. Society's gaze turned elsewhere, but the seed of scandal rooted deep, awaiting spring's thaw to bloom into greater mystery. In retrospect, 1884 marked the fracture, when innocence cracked, allowing darkness to seep. Isabella's story, laced with moral symbolism, warns of passion's idolatry, wealth's illusion, the soul's vulnerability to serpentine charms. As we delve deeper, feel the weight. Each choice a stone in judgment's scale, tipping toward justice or mercy. But the affair's embers smoldered on. Pembroke vanished briefly, only to resurface with pleas that tugged at Isabella's heartstrings. Letters smuggled past watchful eyes, promising eternal devotion if funds flowed once more. She wavered, torn between marital vows and heart's rebellion, embodying the eternal struggle of flesh versus spirit. Theodore's mercy extended. No public divorce, but separation shadow. Isabella retreated to Boston winters, her social calendar barren, friends' calls unanswered. Isolation bred reflection. Nights by fireside, Bible open to Proverbs' warnings on adultery, psalms of lament echoing her sorrow. Yet redemption eluded. By 1886, financial strains mounted. Theodore's steel empire faltered under market whims. Isabella's extravagances a hidden drain. Auditors uncovered more, forged signatures on loans, jewels pawned in secrecy. Confrontations escalated, voices raw with accusation. How could you betray not just me, but our sacred union? Theodore's plea met with Isabella's defiant silence. Spiritually, she grappled, church attendance sporadic, confessions halting. Priests spoke of repentance's path, but pride barred the way. Dreams haunted her, visions of divine courts, scales weighing her soul against feathers of truth. Newport's summers resumed, but altered. Isabella's presence tolerated, not celebrated. Parties lacked former luster, guests whispering behind fans. She masked pain with brighter gowns, louder laughter, but eyes betrayed inner turmoil, guilt's shadow, sin's stain. Pembroke's true nature crystallized in 1887, arrested for fraud in Philadelphia, his web unraveling. Isabella's name spared, but knowledge scorched. Betrayal's double edge, lover's deceit, self's folly. Theodore offered olive branch, counseling, travel for renewal. Europe beckoned, Paris's boulevards, Rome's ruins reminding of empire's falls. Isabella journeyed, seeking solace in cathedral's hush, stained glass narrating saints' trials mirroring her own. Return brought fragile peace. Social rehabilitation slow. Charities embraced anew. Theater patronage revived. Whispers faded, but scars remained. Reputation's fragility a constant reminder. Yet undercurrents persisted. Anonymous letters arrived, hinting at deeper conspiracies. families plotting her downfall, Pembroke's accomplices lurking. Paranoia bloomed, nights sleepless, shadows seeming alive with retribution's promise. In the shadowed confines of a private dining room at the Belmont Hotel, where gas lamps flickered like wary sentinels against the encroaching November dusk, Theodore Fairmont delivered his ultimatum with the cold precision of a judge pronouncing sentence. The air was thick with the aroma of aged leather from the high-backed chairs and the faint tang of cigar smoke lingering from prior meetings, as if the room itself held the ghosts of countless deals struck in secrecy. Theodore's face, etched with lines of betrayal that seemed to deepen under the lamplight's glow, bore the weight of a man whose world had crumbled like ancient ruins under an earthquake's fury. "Renounce him publicly," he demanded, his voice a low rumble that echoed off the paneled walls. "Endure a year of seclusion from the eyes of society. Surrender control of your finances and freedoms. In return, I spare us the scandal of divorce, and we rebuild, through charity, through cunning alliances, what you've shattered." It was a covenant of survival, laced with the bitter aftertaste of mercy withheld, a proposal that invoked the biblical notion of repentance. Turn from sin or face the wilderness alone. Isabella's response was not defiance in words, but in action, a vanishing act that sent tremors through the elite circles of Newport. For 3 interminable days, she slipped into the ether, her absence a void that pulsed with unspoken accusations. The search, frantic yet discreet to avoid further gossip, led Theodore's agents to a modest boarding house in Providence, its weathered clapboard facade sagging under the weight of autumn rains, rooms lit by sputtering kerosene lamps that cast elongated shadows like accusing fingers. There, under an assumed name that harkened back to her untarnished youth, Isabella was found by her loyal maid, who burst into the dim chamber to discover her mistress seated by a cracked window, gazing into the misty streets below. The room smelled of damp wool and stale tea, a far cry from Rosecliff's opulent boudoirs, symbolizing her fall from grace, like Eve cast out, pondering the cost of forbidden knowledge. Confronted in that humble sanctuary by Theodore and his cadre of lawyers, their tailored suits clashing with the room's poverty, Isabella unveiled a counter-proposal that teetered on the brink of genius or lunacy. Her eyes, still holding that sapphire fire, gleamed with a fervor that bordered on the prophetic. "I'll expose it all," she declared, her voice steady as a confessor's, the rot at the heart of Newport's splendor. "Through Jonathan, I've glimpsed the underbelly, the hidden sins that prop up your empires." She spoke of Pembroke's revelations during their stolen moments, architectural secrets woven into the very bones of the mansions along Bellevue Avenue. Concealed chambers behind ornate fireplaces, labyrinthine passages snaking through walls thick as fortress ramparts, vaults disguised amid wine cellars' gloom where illicit treasures lay buried. These were not mere whims of design, she alleged, but tools for iniquity, repositories for bribes, forged deeds, evidence of tax evasions that mocked the laws of man and God alike. The accusations cascaded like a torrent from a breached dam. Senator William Blackstone's library, where a false panel concealed ledgers of corruption, bribes flowing like tainted manna to secure political favors. Railroad Baron Charles Penton's subterranean lair, stocked with documents that twisted land rights into knots of deceit. And most damning, a cabal of 3 families manipulating steel markets, their greed inflating government contracts in defiance of justice's scales. Isabella claimed proof, notes, sketches, whispered confessions, gathered in passion's haze, now weapons in her arsenal. It was a threat that evoked divine retribution, as if she channeled the prophets of old, unveiling idols in the temple. Theodore's lawyers, faces paling under their starched collars, dismissed it as delusion, yet fear not at them. In the Gilded Age's web of alliances, where fortunes intertwined like vines in a forsaken garden, such revelations could unravel everything, triggering probes that exposed not just crimes, but the gray moralities that sustained their world. False or true, the mere utterance would be a plague, spreading ruin as swiftly as biblical locusts. Thus convened the fateful summit on November 20th, 1884, in the Belmont's secluded enclave, where heavy velvet curtains muffled the harbor's distant foghorns and crystal decanters gleamed with amber liquors that promised false courage. Representatives from 5 dynasties gathered, steel heirs with hands calloused from boardroom battles, railroad scions whose empires spanned continents, senators' aides versed in the art of discretion. The air hummed with tension, breaths shallow, as Isabella entered like a queen in exile, her gown of somber gray silk rustling like autumn leaves underfoot. With the poise of one who had stared into the abyss, she laid out her demands. $100,000 in unmarked bills, Pembroke's debts erased like sins absolved, safe passage to Europe for them both, a perpetual banishment where they could rebuild in anonymity. In return, silence. Her lips sealed, allegations entombed, society spared the flood of truth. The haggling stretched 6 grueling hours, voices rising and falling like waves against Newport's cliffs, bargains struck and shattered. By midnight's toll, a pact emerged, but twisted by the family's cunning. The funds and debt clearance granted, yet stipulations added like chains, separate voyages across the Atlantic's vast, unforgiving expanse, a 2-year vow of silence between lovers, enforced by legal oaths, eternal exile from American shores, with no whispers back to the elite. Isabella acquiesced, her signature flowing across the parchment with elegant finality. Yet observers noted a shift, a distant gaze, as if her soul wandered realms beyond the room's confines, dreaming of redemption or ruin. When queried on the exile's irrevocability, she offered an enigmatic smile. Love demands its tithes, and heaven witnesses all. It was a statement laced with spiritual undertones, hinting at a higher court where earthly deals held no sway. The ransom arrived on November 25th, bundled in a leather satchel delivered under cover of night to her temporary haven, its weight a tangible symbol of sin's price. Isabella's departure was set for December 2nd, aboard the steamship Britannica from New York's bustling piers, where smokestacks belched plumes like offerings to indifferent gods. Pembroke, ostensibly, had preceded her, sailing 3 days prior on a rival vessel, his path a solitary thread in fate's tapestry. It appeared the grandest romantic bargain in history, a love purchased with gold, exile its currency. But destiny, or perhaps divine intervention, intervened. Isabella never graced the Britannica's decks, her absence a specter that would haunt the Gilded Age's remnants. Her final week in America unfolded like a ritual of farewell, each act imbued with the solemnity of last rites, as if she sensed the hand of judgment descending. Returning to Newport, she claimed a suite at the Belmont under her maiden name, Aldridge, a symbolic shedding of marital bonds, reverting to innocence before the fall. The hotel's corridors, lined with gilt-framed mirrors that reflected infinite versions of herself, echoed with her solitary footsteps. Staff whispered of her composure. Meals taken in seclusion, trays of poached eggs, and fine china left untouched save for sips of tea that steamed like fleeting prayers. She penned letters by candlelight, quills scratching parchment in rhythms that suggested confessions or absolutions, dispatching a dozen missives via the desk clerk, William Chun, whose immigrant eyes, from California's gold rush scars, noted destinations lost to memory, perhaps pleas to kin or warnings to the wicked. On November 28th, an eccentricity emerged, a summons for photographer Marcus Steinberg, his studio a haven of velvet backdrops and chemical scents where society's masks were captured eternally. For 2 hours, Isabella posed under arc lights that hummed like distant thunder, demanding variations, seated regally, standing ethereal, shadows playing across her features like veils of guilt. She fiddled with a ruby brooch, heirloom from her grandmother, its facets catching light like blood drops frozen in time, a symbol of lineage's burden, perhaps a talisman against spiritual decay. Steinberg later confided the session's eeriness, her beauty undimmed, yet eyes harboring storms of resolve and sorrow. "No need for returns from Europe," she murmured, her smile a mask over abyss. The developed plates, unearthed years hence, portrayed her in poised finality, gaze piercing beyond the lens, as if beholding judgment's throne or a lover's phantom. December 1st dawned with pilgrimage, a hired carriage, its wheels rumbling over frost-kissed cobblestones, ferrying her to Newport's sacred sites. The casino, alive with echoes of laughter and deals, Trinity Church, its spire a finger accusing the heavens where vows once bound her. The cliff walk, waves crashing below like wrathful sermons, salt spray mingling with tears unshed. Driver Thomas McGillicuddy recounted her vigils, silent stares into horizons, as if communing with spirits or bidding adieu to earthly vanities. It was a procession of penance, evoking biblical wanderers, Lot's wife glancing back, or the prodigal pausing before exile. Evening brought rituals crescendo, a lavish dinner summoned to her room, delivered by night manager Robert Sterling amid the suite's opulent hush. Clad in midnight blue silk that shimmered like forbidden depths, jewels ablaze, including the ruby sentinel, she exuded agitated grace. "Generosity is wealth's last grace," she intoned, pressing an extravagant tip into his palm, her touch cold as marble saints. It felt like alms for the soul, a final act of charity before the void. The ultimate sighting, 11:30 p.m., descending the grand staircase in a traveling cloak of deepest wool, valise in hand, a pilgrim's burden. Chun, at his post, offered aid. She declined with polite finality, stepping into the fog-shrouded night. The mist, rolling from the harbor like breath of the divine, enveloped her form, bells tolling faintly like calls to vespers. She vanished, a wraith into ether, alive no more in mortal sight. Her no-show on the Britannica spurred Theodore's alarm, summoning police whose boots thudded into the Belmont like harbingers. Chief Detective Samuel Harrison, a stoic veteran of docks depravities, orchestrated the probe with emerging forensic zeal, witness canvases, evidence sifts, a blueprint for modern sleuthing. Reconstructions painted closure, room items arrayed meticulously, jewels absent, diamond bracelet vanished like stolen grace, letter drafts hinting farewells, a charred parchment in the grate, fragments of sums and initials, JP for Pembroke, WB for Blackstone, puzzles of conspiracy. Pembroke's trail chilled, London address a phantom drop, no trace in Albion's inns. Sheep manifeste betrayed, booking sans boarding. Deeper digs unveiled fraud's pattern. Credentials half-true, departures hasty, debts trailing like sins unconfessed, liaisons with fortune's daughters a recurring curse. Sinister apex. Inspections of mansions confirmed Isabella's claims. Hidden nooks in 3 estates. Passages coiling like serpents in Eden. Built for secrets that defied man's law and heaven's gaze. As fog lifted on inquiries, spiritual chills deepened. Was Isabella's end self-willed atonement, or divine snatch? Her threats, a mirror to society's idols, greed, lust, deceit, invoking judgment's sword. Exile's pact, meant for salvation, perhaps birth damnation, her vanishing a parable. What profit a man to gain the world and lose his soul? Investigations widened. Harbor dredges for bodies, none yielded. Anonymous tips of sightings in distant ports, vapors all. Theodore, haunted, funded private eyes, their reports weaving more enigmas. Pembroke's aliases, perhaps a mastercon. Isabella complicit or victim. Society quaked. Families fortified walls, literal and figurative, fearing exposure's light. Whispers in salons. Her ghost walks cliffs, ruby brooch glinting in moonlight, a warning against passion's idolatry. Years blurred, but legacy endured. Letters surfacing in attics, photographs in auctions, each artifact a thread in redemption's unfinished weave. Isabella's story, spiritually fraught, echoes, sin's chains bind, but grace's fog may conceal paths to mercy, or oblivion. In retrospect, that November bargain was Faustian, love's allure masking soul's peril. As probes faltered, one truth loomed. Divine justice, patient as the sea, claims its due in mist-shrouded dawns. In the dim underbelly of the Pinton Mansion's wine cellar, where racks of dusty Bordeaux bottles stood sentinel like forgotten relics of excess, the air grew thick with a musty scent of aged oak and hidden decay. It was here, months after Jonathan Pembroke's architectural wizardry had woven secrets into the stone, that the true purpose of those modifications emerged, not as mere safeguards for illicit fortunes, but as instruments of a premeditated doom. The compartments, passages snaking through walls like veins of corruption, had been etched into blueprints long before whispers of Isabella's affair tainted Newport salons. This chronology whispered of design, not chance. Pembroke's courtship perhaps a calculated snare, his charm a lure into a web spun by the elite to protect their empires from exposure's light. It evoked the biblical serpent in the garden, tempting with knowledge that led only to exile and death, a reminder that sin's roots delve deep, often planted before the fruit is tasted. Detective Samuel Harrison's probe, methodical as a confessor's inquiry, pivoted dramatically with the arrival of an enigmatic informant. Mrs. Margaret Winthrop, an elderly seamstress whose needle had threaded the fabrics of Newport's aristocracy for decades, appeared at the police station under the cover of twilight, her shawl drawn tight against the winter chill that seeped through cracked windows. Her face, lined with the etchings of hard labor and harder secrets, bore the solemnity of one bearing witness to unholy acts. She demanded privacy, her voice a quaver of fear laced with resolve, insisting her name be shielded like a sacred vow. The mighty fall hard, she murmured, and they crushed the small beneath them. Harrison, sensing the weight of her words, ushered her into a back room lit by a single oil lamp, its flame dancing shadows across walls papered with wanted posters, reminders of justice's elusive grasp. What spilled from Mrs. Winthrop's lips was a tale both mesmerizing and monstrous, a narrative that chilled the blood like a draft from an open grave. On the fateful night of December 1st, she recounted, she toiled late in the Pinton Mansion's sewing alcove, the rhythmic prick of her needle punctuating the silence. Moonlight filtered through leaded panes, casting ethereal glows on silks and satins destined for balls where sins were danced away. Drawn by muffled voices from the main house, unusual at such an hour, she crept to a window overlooking the rear courtyard, its cobblestones slick with frost that glittered like scattered diamonds under the stars. There, in the spectral light, she beheld Isabella Fairmont, her form unmistakable in the deep blue gown that caught the night's hush like shroud. Flanked by two strangers, men of stern carriage, cloaked in dark overcoats that swallowed their features, Isabella gesticulated with fervent intensity, her hands slicing the air as if warding off demons. The men stood impassive, shadows incarnate, their responses lost to the wind. After a tense interlude of 20 minutes, one extended a parcel, envelope or bundle, its purpose veiled, and Isabella, with a nod that spoke of reluctant accord, entered a waiting carriage with them. The vehicle rattled away into the fog, wheels echoing like the toll of judgment bells. Compelling as her account was, it bore flaws that gnawed at Harrison's skepticism. Descriptions of the men were vague, tall, broad-shouldered, faces obscured by hats and mist, her vantage point compromised by distance and dimness. Moreover, Winthrop's past whispered of unreliability, dismissed from prior employments for loose lips that spilled employers' confidences into society's eager ears. Harrison teetered on dismissal, viewing her as a seeker of notoriety, until a singular detail pierced his doubt like a divine revelation. The ruby brooch, she specified, pinned at her throat, catching the moonlight in a crimson flare like blood on snow. This matched precisely the accounts from hotel staff and photographer Marcus Steinberg, a gem not publicized, known only to intimate witnesses. It was as if Providence itself had handed Harrison a thread to unravel the tapestry of deceit, echoing scriptures where truth emerges from the mouths of the humble to confound the proud. As revelations mounted, the veil over Newport's gilded sins thinned, exposing a conspiracy that reeked of brimstone. Harrison, delving into financial ledgers with the aid of a federal sleuth versed in monetary malfeasance, uncovered transfers that sketched a portrait of premeditation. The $100,000 exile fund, meant to spirit Isabella to Europe's distant shores, had funneled into a New York account under I.C. Aldrich, her initials and maiden name, a nod to reclaimed innocence. Yet the sum lay dormant, untouched as a forsaken offering. Forged signatures marred the documents, handwriting alien to Isabella's elegant loops, evidence of impersonation, perhaps during the final parleys, or a grand charade to mask darker intents. This forgery invoked the biblical false prophets, deceiving with mimics of truth, leading souls astray into perdition's jaws. Urgency surged when Pembroke's fate surfaced, not vanished, but slain in a Boston boarding house on November 30th, mere hours before Isabella's eclipse. Official verdict: heart failure, belied the housekeeper's tale of two dapper visitors, business associates who lingered hours in his chamber before slipping into the night. No signs of struggle, yet the timing screamed orchestration. Boston broadsheets buried the news, delaying its ripple to Newport until Isabella's arrangements were sealed. Had she known, her pilgrimage of farewells might have halted. Instead, she stepped toward a snare, love's blindness her fatal flaw, a spiritual caution of idols forged from flesh. Crumbling under judgment's gaze, Harrison's lens sharpened on the duo, Pembroke's callers and Winthrop's shadows, phantoms linking deaths. Discovery dawned via the Pinkerton Agency, a shadowy syndicate employed by Newport's elite for sensitive affairs. Warrants pried opened their vaults, unveiling a cabal's blueprint, surveillance dossiers on Isabella and Pembroke, movements mapped like sinners' paths to Gehenna. Reports dripped with euphemisms, neutralized threats, ensured discretion, veiled calls for elimination, chilling as Cain's fratricide. A November 28th missive urged immediate resolution, citing Isabella's emotional frailty as camouflage for outcomes, words that stank of premeditated sin, defying the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." Climax crested in Pembroke's blueprints. The Pinton cellar's vault, expansive beyond mere storage, a cavity for horrors. Warrant in hand, Harrison's cadre descended on February 14th, 1890. Valentine's irony, Love's Day twisted into Revelation's grim feast. Dawn's light pierced the mansion's grandeur, rooms echoing emptiness since Charles Pinton's flight to New York. The cellar, at first glance innocuous, bottles arrayed in solemn rows, stone floors unmarred, betrayed anomalies. Measurements off by 8 feet, a void behind the north wall. Crowbars breached the facade, revealing a 10-by-10 chamber, lead-sheathed walls muffling cries like a sepulchre seal. Within lay Isabella's husk, swathed in decayed silk cloak, ruby brooch a defiant spark amid ruin. Coroner's probe, chloral hydrate, insidious venom laced in champagne remnants from a nearby flute, poison of assassins, undetectable as subtle temptation. Yet horror deepened. Wall scratches, frantic etchings of entrapment, a clutched note, ink faded but accusing, fragments decrying betrayers. She had awakened in her tomb, clawing for escape as toxin claimed her, a living burial evoking Lazarus reversed. Death without resurrection, sin's wage manifest. Transformation, missing person to murder most foul, conspiracy sprawling like Babel's tower of hubris. Reconstruction, exile allure, agents the two men, drugging her at Pinton under Europe's pretense, sealing her in soundproof hell. Lead, meant for secrets, became execution's veil. Pembroke silenced for his knowledge. Architect of compartments turned liability, his end prelude to hers. Arrests thundered. Pinton, Blackstone, kin charged with conspiracy. Pinkertons with murder's deed. Society quaked, ripples to Washington, exposing industrial idols' clay feet. Yet justice faltered. Witnesses recanted. Winthrop claiming mistaken eyes. Evidence vanished from vaults, flames consuming Pinkerton files in accidental blaze. Bureaucracy's thorns, reassignments, jurisdictional mazes, delays devouring zeal. By summer 1890, invisible hands, wealth's tendrils in governance, stifled truth. Theodore's withdrawal sealed it. Public plea for peace, private pact, contracts fattened, security assured. For silence, endorsing suicide from despair. Betrayal's echo, husband trading justice for gold, like Judas Silver, soul bartered for temporal gain. Spiritually, Isabella's saga thunders divine themes. Retribution's hand, unseen yet inexorable. Sin's exposure, even if earthly courts fail. Her chamber, a metaphor for buried guilts, scratches cries for redemption denied. Newport's elite, spared man's law, faced heavens. Legacies tainted, mansions haunted by whispers of the damned. Investigations lingered, fragments surfacing, anonymous letters decrying cover-ups, descendants probing archives for absolution. Theodore, wealth restored, lived shadowed, eyes hollow as one who sold his birthright. Pinkerton's reformed, yet stains endured. In retrospect, 1890 marked judgment's partial dawn, body found, yet souls unclaimed. Isabella's ruby, auctioned later, gleamed like blood atonement. Reminder, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. As fog clears on this chapter, ponder, were agents tools of man? Or providence? Conspiracy's web, spun tight, unraveled threads of fate, leaving moral voids. Her notes ghosts accuse still, echoing psalms of the afflicted. Years on, mansions stood, but auras shifted, visitors sensing chills in cellars, as if Isabella's spirit lingered, guardian against recurring sins. Society evolved, Gilded Age fading, yet lessons eternal. Pride's fall, justice's delay, not denial. Theodore's end, reclusive, fortune eroded by scandal's aftershocks, deathbed confessions rumored but buried. Family splintered, names fading from glory. Isabella's grave, modest in Boston, draws pilgrims. Flowers left, prayers whispered for her soul's peace, symbol of innocence slain by avarice. Thus closes this act, but echoes resound. In wealth pursuit, soul's peril. Divine scales tip, unseen but sure. October 15th, 1890. A cold wind whipped across Newport's island cemetery, rattling the skeletal branches of ancient elms like the bones of the unrepentant. A small knot of mourners, fewer than 20 souls, gathered around a freshly dug grave. No black-plumed horses, no floral arches, no society matrons in Parisian mourning veils. Just the low drone of a priest's Latin, the scrape of spades on frost-hard earth, and the distant crash of waves that sounded, to those who dared listen, like the slow turning of judgment's wheel. Isabella Fairmont was lowered into the ground without eulogy, without tears that anyone dared show in public, without a single line in the society pages that once chronicled her every breath. To the world, she had become an unperson, erased as cleanly as a sinful thought before confession. Yet in the hush after the coffin lid closed, one mourner, her former maid, now aged beyond her years, whispered a promise to the wind. They may seal your grave, ma'am, but they'll never seal your truth. The courts of men had spoken. Charles Pennon walked free, his smile thin as a communion wafer. Senator Blackstone's charges dissolved like incense smoke. The Pinkerton killers vanished into new names, new cities, new lives bought with blood money. The powerful closed ranks toasted their deliverance with vintage champagne and returned to their marble palaces believing the Almighty himself had looked away. But Scripture is merciless on this point. Be sure your sin will find you out. And in the years that followed, the families who murdered Isabella discovered that some ledgers are kept not in mahogany boardrooms, but in heaven. Charles Pennon was the first to feel the weight. He fled the mansion where Isabella drew her last tortured breaths. Yet the walls followed him. Servants whispered of lights burning in empty rooms, of a woman's silhouette at the top of the grand staircase, of the ruby brooch glinting in darkness no lamp could explain. Pinton took to drink, then to opium, then to pacing the corridors of his New York palace at 3 a.m., clutching a revolver, screaming at shadows that wore Isabella's face. In 1895, federal agents, unconnected to the murder case, began seizing Penn & Steel assets. They tore apart the wine cellar he thought forever sealed. Behind a false wall, they found not just Isabella's accusing fingerprints and dust, but the original ledgers, the forged bids, the bribes written in his own hand. By 1897, the empire was ash. On a rain-lashed November night, Charles Penton put the same revolver to his temple. The coroner, paid handsomely, called a heart failure. The servants who washed the blood from the Persian rug knew better. They said the scent of French perfume lingered for days. Senator William Blackstone lasted longer, long enough to watch his name stripped from the Senate rolls in 1892 when investigators found the bribery cache behind his library fireplace, exactly where Isabella swore it would be. Expelled, ruined, dying in a rented room above a Bowery saloon. He reportedly spent his final night clawing at the walls, screaming that a woman in blue silk was sealing him inside brick by brick. Thomas Hartwell followed in 1896, hanging from the chandelier of his Philadelphia office the very week the Interstate Commerce Commission published evidence of the railroad cartel Isabella had named. Robert Sterling lost everything in the Panic of '93. His bank's illegal loans exposed, his vaults empty, his suicide note a single line. She was right about all of it. One by one, the conspirators fell. Bankruptcies, scandals, suicides, mysterious fires that consumed only the rooms where secret papers were kept. The Pinkerton Agency itself crumbled beneath congressional hearings that read like the Book of Revelation for hired mercenaries. Homestead, Pullman, Coeur d'Alene, every act of violence laid bare. By 1900, the once feared name was poison. Men who had buried Isabella alive now slept with lights burning and Bibles open to Psalm 73. Until I went into the sanctuary of God, then understood I their end. Thou didst set them in slippery places. Detective Samuel Harrison retired in 1905, broken by the case no court would finish. He spent his remaining years compiling a private testament, hundreds of pages locked in an iron box, labeled simply, "For when they are all dead." When Harrison died in 1918, his daughter opened the box and wept. Inside were death certificates, whispered confessions, ledgers no one had seen since 1890. Proof that Isabella Fairmont was not the only body bricked in Newport's hidden chambers. At least 7 others, servants, journalists, a reform-minded priest, had vanished between 1885 and 1898. Harrison's final note, written in a trembling hand, read, "Justice delayed is still justice. The Lord is not slack concerning his promise. He is merely patient." The Penton mansion stood empty for 2 decades, its windows blind, its gardens choked with thorns. Locals crossed themselves when passing the gates. Lights moved behind shattered panes. On certain foggy nights, the faint strains of a waltz drifted across the lawn. The same waltz Isabella had danced the night she first met Jonathan Pembroke. In 1920, a Catholic charity bought the estate to house orphans. The children arrived wide-eyed and laughing. They left silent. They spoke of a beautiful lady in blue who tucked them in at night, whispering, "Don't be afraid of the dark. The dark is where the truth hides." Staff heard scratching from the basement, slow, deliberate, the rhythm of fingernails that had once clawed for life. In 1935, the diocese closed the orphanage, citing spiritual oppression incompatible with the care of innocent souls. When the wrecking ball came in 1938, workers uncovered 3 more sealed chambers. Inside, a maid's locket, a reporter's notebook, a priest's rosary, relics of the silenced. The foreman ordered the finds burned. That night he dreamed of a woman pinning a ruby brooch to his lapel and saying softly, "Word in memory of me." He woke screaming, the gem burning against his skin, though no jewel was there. The ruby itself became a cursed talisman, returned to Theodore Fairmont, donated to a Boston museum, stolen in 1895. It surfaced again and again, always in the possession of someone about to die, tragically, inexplicably young. A New York heiress in 1902, a Philadelphia debutante in 1918, a Washington lobbyist's wife in 1937. Each time the brooch vanished after the funeral, as if satisfied with its harvest. Theodore Fairmont never spoke Isabella's name again in public. He poured his fortune into shelters for battered women and quietly funded private detectives who reopened suicide cases involving the powerful. When he died in 1923, his will contained one line no newspaper printed. To my beloved wife, Isabella, forgive me. I chose the world and lost my soul. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday in 1954, a workman renovating the Belmont Hotel's basement storage rooms felt a brick shift beneath his trowel. It slid aside as though pushed by an unseen hand. Behind it, a tin box, rusted but intact, sealed with wax bearing the Fairmont crest. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, lay Isabella's final gift to the world. Dozens of letters, bank drafts, architectural plans annotated in her elegant script, a list of 15 hidden chambers with precise locations, and one photograph. Isabella in her blue silk gown, ruby brooch blazing at her throat, staring straight into the lens with eyes that held no fear, only certainty. On the back, in her handwriting, if you're reading this, I am gone. But truth is immortal. Let them tremble. The documents confirmed everything. Briberies, monopolies, murders, for generations of conspirators long dead. The statute of limitations had expired decades earlier. No one would ever stand trial. Yet when the Newport Historical Society placed the evidence on public display in 1955, visitors reported the temperature in the gallery dropping 20 degrees the moment they approached Isabella's photograph. Docents still speak, in hushed tones, of the faint scent of French perfume that drifts through the room at closing time, and of the soft, deliberate scratching that sometimes echoes from beneath the floorboards long after the lights go out. Room 237 was renumbered, repurposed, locked away. But on certain winter nights when the fog rolls thick from the harbor, guests in adjacent rooms wake to the sound of a woman weeping, quiet, dignified, eternal. Housekeepers find champagne flutes on side tables that no one placed there, lipstick stains on the rims the color of fresh blood. And always, always, the faint outline of ruby light glowing beneath the door that no longer bears a number. Isabella Fairmont never received justice in a courtroom of men, but in the court that matters, the one whose judge neither slumbers nor sleeps, she was heard. Her murderers escaped the gallows only to meet the noose of their own making. Their empires crumbled to dust. Their names became synonyms for hubris. And somewhere, in the unseen realms where the scales never lie, a woman in blue silk stands before the throne, ruby brooch blazing like the unquenchable fire of truth, and testifies. The books are closed. The mansions are gone. But on foggy Newport evenings, when the Atlantic wind carries the scent of salt and secrets, locals still lower their voices and say, "Don't walk the cliff walk alone after midnight." She's still keeping watch. She always will be, because some ghosts are not restless dead. Some are appointed sentinels. Some are the voice of divine memory, saying again and again, until every stone is overturned. Nothing is hidden that will not be revealed. And in the silence that follows, if you listen very, very carefully, you can still hear the soft, deliberate scratching of truth refusing to die.